The human swallowed hard, his heart racing. The atmosphere between them had shifted once more, and he felt the weight of the question pressing down on him. This wasn't just about biology anymore. There was something more at play. Something that transcended what either of them understood. "I don't know," he replied, his voice quiet, his words unsure. Maybe it's because we're connected. Somehow, maybe the energy between us has changed. Maybe we're different now, after everything we've been through. The alien girl stared at him, her eyes flickering with uncertainty. The tension between them had grown too large to ignore, too powerful to push aside. There was something undeniable about the way they were drawn together, something electric, something that neither of them could explain. It was as though their connection wasn't just physical, it was deeper than that. It was as though something was shifting, something they couldn't see but could only feel. "Perhaps you are right," she mused, almost to herself. "But I feel as though there is more to it. This energy, this force between us, it feels like something we cannot control, something that was never meant to happen. I can feel it deep within me. It is unnatural." The human nodded, understanding her unease. He, too, felt it. The energy that pulsed between them wasn't just a curiosity anymore. It was becoming something more. Something they couldn't simply ignore. "We need to figure this out," he said, his voice steady now, though the fear still lingered beneath the surface. This connection. It's not something we can just leave unexplained. It's too dangerous, too powerful. The alien girl took a deep breath, her mind racing with possibilities. She had never encountered anything like this in her long journey across the stars. But this human, this strange, unpredictable creature was beginning to challenge everything she had known about life, about the universe. And despite the overwhelming fear and confusion she felt, there was something else, something stronger. A sense of wonder, of curiosity, of desire. Her gaze softened, though her mind remained focused on the task at hand. "Yes," she agreed, "we will uncover the truth. But for now, we must proceed carefully." As the air thickened with unspoken tension, the two of them stood on the brink of something unknown, something that would change their worlds forever. Neither of them knew exactly what would happen next, but one thing was certain: they were no longer simply two beings caught in an unintentional moment. The connection between them had deepened into something far more complicated, far more dangerous than either of them could have anticipated. What had begun as a simple encounter now felt like the start of something much larger, and neither of them could escape what was coming next. The question still lingered, unanswered, as they both stood in the quiet uncertainty of what was to come. Why had the human's body reacted this way? The alien girl couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to the human's reaction. It wasn't just his body responding, it was something deeper, something almost intangible. She had learned the basics of human biology, of course, but this was something that defied all logic. Something in the energy between them had shifted in a way she couldn't explain, and every instinct within her warned her that they were on the verge of something monumental. She took a step back, forcing herself to maintain some distance. Her mind raced, cataloging every piece of information she had gathered during her mission. She had studied many species, observed their behaviors, and yet humans remained an enigma. There was something fascinating about them, something primal, and it was becoming clearer that her understanding of them was about to be tested in ways she hadn't anticipated. The human watched her, his eyes wary but filled with curiosity, though it was tempered with a hint of discomfort. He could sense her unease, and it only amplified his own. Something about the way she was looking at him now was different, more intense. It was as though she was no longer just studying him, but trying to understand the very core of his existence. He shifted uncomfortably, still unsure of what to make of the situation. "Are you okay?" he asked, the words feeling clumsy as soon as they left his mouth. He wasn't used to feeling so vulnerable, so exposed. But the alien girl's confusion, mixed with the strange energy still pulsing between them, had him on edge. He didn't know if he should push for answers or simply remain silent. She glanced at him, her gaze lingering for a moment before she spoke. "I don't know. I feel something. Something that wasn't there before. It's not just a physical response. It's deeper. Like there's a force at play here that I don't understand." The human frowned, a mix of concern and intrigue clouding his expression. "What kind of force?" "I mean, this is all so strange. I don't think I've ever felt anything like this either." The alien girl exhaled slowly, her mind sifting through the fragments of knowledge she had. She knew what the energy felt like. It was an ancient force, one that she had read about but never experienced. It was a power that could bind or tear apart, and if they weren't careful, if they couldn't figure out what was happening, it could spiral out of control in ways neither of them could anticipate. "Have you ever heard of the binding?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The human blinked. "The binding? What's that?" She shook her head, her long silver hair shimmering slightly in the dim light. "It's a phenomenon that occurs between two beings of different species. It's extremely rare. But when it happens, it creates a bond, an unbreakable connection. Sometimes it's temporary, sometimes it's permanent, and sometimes it's dangerous." The human took a step closer, his expression now filled with a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "Are you saying that this is what's happening between us?" The alien girl hesitated. The words she had spoken were harsh, and they felt foreign in her mouth. The binding was something of a legend, a myth. It was a power so ancient that even her people barely spoke of it. The idea that it was happening to her now, with a human of all beings, was something she hadn't prepared for. "I think so," she admitted, her voice low. "I don't know if we can control it, or if we even want to. But whatever this is, it's not normal. And I fear that we might have triggered it without realizing what it could mean." The human swallowed hard, his thoughts racing. "Wait, so you're saying that whatever this energy is, it's not just between us? It's more than that. This binding thing? Does that mean we're stuck together, like it or not?" She didn't answer right away, her gaze turning distant as she tried to process the enormity of what they were facing. It felt as though the walls around her were closing in, and no matter how much she pushed, the answers didn't come any faster. "I don't know," she replied finally, the words heavy with uncertainty. "But I do know that something is pulling us together. Whether we want it or not, we're caught in it. The energy, the connection, it's evolving with every moment we stay in contact." The human's heart pounded as he took in her words. His mind wasn't ready to accept the reality of what she was saying, but the evidence was all around him. He could feel it, the tension in the air, the way their proximity seemed to stir something inside him that he couldn't control. Every time they stood near each other, the sensation grew more intense. It wasn't just a reaction to the alien girl's touch anymore. It was a force unto itself. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice almost hoarse. The weight of the question hung in the air, unanswered. She didn't have an answer. The knowledge she had about the binding was limited at best. All she knew was that it was powerful, and that once it began, it couldn't be stopped easily. She could feel the hum of the energy between them, stronger now, more urgent. Something was shifting in the atmosphere, like a storm was about to break, but they didn't yet know what the storm would bring. "I think we need to find out what triggered this," she said slowly, "before it gets worse. Before we lose control of it entirely." The human nodded, though a sense of dread had begun to settle in his chest. The idea that they might lose control of this force, whatever it was terrifying. But there was something else that lingered at the back of his mind, something that he couldn't shake. What if this wasn't just a biological or energetic anomaly? What if there was something deeper behind this, the reason that he and the alien girl had been drawn together in the first place? Something hidden. Something none of them could have anticipated? The alien girl looked at him, her eyes serious now. "We have to be careful. If this goes beyond just us, if it starts affecting the environment, the people around us, we could be in danger." The human's heart raced at the thought. "What do you mean? What could happen?" She hesitated, her expression darkening. "I don't know. But if the binding is real and it's beginning to spread, it could reach farther than we could ever imagine." Their surroundings suddenly felt colder, the room growing quieter, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. Whatever had begun between them was far from over, and they both knew they were on the verge of something they weren't ready to face. The energy surged once more, sharper this time, and for the first time, they both realized how much danger they were truly in. And still, neither of them knew just how deep the rabbit hole went. The alien girl's pulse quickened, the air around them thick with a strange electric hum. She felt it too, the gravity of the situation pressing in on them, pulling tighter with every passing second. The connection between her and the human was growing more powerful, more consuming. And as much she wanted to deny it, she couldn't ignore the truth anymore. Whatever force they had awakened, it was far more dangerous than either of them had anticipated. "I don't think we can keep running from this," she said, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and determination. "It's getting stronger, and we're not the only ones affected by it." The human nodded, his face pale, his mind clearly racing to keep up with everything that was happening. He had thought he could handle it, at first thought that the strange sensation, the pull between them, was just some fluke. But now, as the energy between them swirled with greater intensity, he couldn't deny that they were part of something much bigger. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice strained. "Who else could be affected? What are we really dealing with here?" The alien girl looked at him, her eyes wide with urgency. "If this, whatever it is, spreads, it will reach more than just us. It will spread across the entire area, maybe even farther. The binding is unstable. It can't just exist between us. It'll start bleeding into everything around us, everything living, everything in its path. And that's when things will really spiral out of control." The human stepped back, the weight of her words sinking in. The room felt colder, the air heavier. His mind spun as he tried to process the danger they were facing, but even as the tension mounted, something deep inside him stirred a strange magnetic pull toward her. It was impossible to ignore. He could feel it in his chest, like an invisible thread binding them together, one that was slowly tightening with every moment. "Are you saying we can stop it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She shook her head slowly, her thoughts running through every possibility, every scenario. She had been trained to handle situations like this But nothing in her training had prepared her for something this powerful, this unpredictable. The force between them was unlike anything she had ever felt, and each time they came into contact, it felt as though the universe itself was shifting. If they didn't act soon, if they didn't find a way to sever the connection before it consumed them, it could be too late. "I don't know if we can," she confessed, her words cutting through the silence like a blade. "The binding is ancient. There's no record of anyone breaking it. If we fail, we could destroy everything around us." The human stared at her, his chest tight, his mind swirling with a mix of panic and disbelief. They had triggered something dangerous, and now they were both caught in it, with no clear way out. But as he looked at her, at the fear in her eyes, he couldn't shake the feeling that she knew more than she was letting on. There was something she wasn't telling him, something even darker than the energy binding them together. Before he could speak, the room suddenly darkened. The lights flickered, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The air shifted again, becoming thick and oppressive. Something was coming. He could feel it, a presence that hadn't been there before, but was now unmistakably real. It was closing in on them, drawn by the force between them, and it wasn't friendly. "What is that?" he asked, his voice shaky. The alien girl's eyes widened. "They're here." He turned toward her, his heart hammering. "Who?" "Who's here?" She didn't answer right away, her expression hardening as she scanned the room. Her senses were on high alert now, every muscle in her body tensed and ready for whatever was coming next. She could feel it, an oppressive presence, something ancient, something that had been lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. And now, that moment had come. "They're hunters," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "They've been tracking me for a long time, and now they've found us." The human's stomach dropped. The weight of her words hit him hard. He had no idea who these hunters were or why they were hunting her, but he knew one thing for sure: they weren't here for peace. A low, rumbling sound echoed from the hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of boots hitting the ground, heavy and methodical. The human could feel the ground tremble beneath his feet as the sound drew closer, like the steps of a predator closing in on its prey.
His breath quickened, panic rising in his chest.
"How many are there?" he asked, his voice tight with fear. The alien girl's eyes narrowed as she listened, her sharp ears picking up the faintest details of the approaching footsteps. "More than enough to overwhelm us," she said, her voice low and grim. "We can't face them head-on. We have to find a way out, now." He didn't need to hear more. Without a word, he grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the door. They couldn't wait any longer. They had no choice but to run. As they rushed out into the hallway, the alien girl's mind raced. The hunters were not the only threat now. The energy between her and the human had escalated to a point where she wasn't sure they could control it. It was becoming harder to resist. Each step they took, the pulse inside her grew stronger. It was as though the binding was responding to the danger, amplifying their emotions, pushing them closer to the edge. "We have to hurry," she urged, her voice barely above a breath. "If they get us, they'll use the binding to control us. And that would be the end." The human's pulse was racing. His thoughts scattered as they sprinted through the narrow hallways, the sound of the approaching hunters growing louder with each passing second. The alien girl led the way, her senses heightened, every fiber of her being focused on the threat ahead. She could feel the energy building between them, pulling them in ways that didn't make sense. But then, just as they turned a corner, they stopped dead in their tracks. The hunters had arrived. The hallway was filled with figures cloaked in shadow, their eyes glowing with an eerie, unnatural light. They were taller than humans, their limbs long and sinewy, moving with an unsettling fluidity. And in their hands, they held weapons of unfamiliar design, sharp, deadly. The human's breath caught in his throat. "This is it," he whispered, his voice barely audible. But the alien girl, with her heightened senses and deep knowledge of the energy they had triggered, wasn't about to give up without a fight. She took a deep breath, the energy between her and the human surging with intensity. They had one chance to escape, and she wasn't going to let it slip away. The tension in the hallway thickened with each passing moment, the glowing eyes of the hunters locking onto the alien girl and the human. The figures moved closer, their silent approach almost predatory. The human's heart hammered in his chest, his breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. He glanced at the alien girl, expecting to see fear, but her face was set in grim determination. "We don't have much time," she whispered, her voice steady despite the overwhelming situation. She could feel the pulse between them, an energy that had been growing with each passing second, pulling her toward the human in ways she couldn't explain. The longer they stood here, the stronger it became. She had to control it. If she didn't, the danger would only escalate. She reached out to him, her fingers brushing against his arm, and a shock of heat rushed through her. The power surged, uncontrolled, and for a moment she saw a flash of something in the human's eyes. Something that wasn't fear, but something deeper, more primal. The energy between them flared like a wildfire, and for a split second, she thought she might lose control completely. But then, a voice broke through the silence. "Stop!" a calm, authoritative voice said, cutting through the mounting tension. The hunters froze, their eyes narrowing as one of them stepped forward, raising a hand in a gesture that silenced the others. The alien girl's heart skipped a beat. She recognized the figure immediately, the leader of the hunters, a being who had crossed her path before. "You." The word escaped her lips in a harsh whisper, but she could feel the weight of it. The leader's cold eyes locked onto her, and she knew with a certainty that struck her like a blow that they had been expecting her. "You've been running from us for a long time." But there was no kindness in it, only a quiet menace. "And now, you've brought the human into this." The human looked at the alien girl, confusion and fear written across his face. "What's going on? Who are these people?" Before she could answer, the leader spoke again, his voice dripping with dark amusement. "Oh, they're not just people, my dear. There's something far older, far more dangerous. And this human you've chosen to bind yourself to, he's the key. You were foolish to think you could escape the consequences of awakening that energy. You should have known better." The alien girl's stomach dropped as the realization hit her. The binding between her and the human, it wasn't an accident. It had been set in motion long before she had ever met him. She had been a part of something much larger, much darker, and now she had brought him into it. "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice steady despite the panic rising in her chest. The leader smiled coldly, his eyes glinting with something almost predatory. "What we want is simple. The energy you've awakened is a power we've sought for millennia. And now that it's active, we will use it. Together, you and the human will give us control over it. You are no longer just a fugitive. You are a key to something much, much bigger. You've awakened the power, and now you will hand it over." The alien girl's mind raced. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about the very fabric of the universe itself, about the balance of power that had been maintained for so long, and the leaders of the hunters were intent on tearing it all apart. But as the tension mounted, the human's voice cut through the air. "You think you can control us?" His voice was surprisingly calm, but there was an undercurrent of something fierce in it, something that made the alien girl look at him in new light. She had never seen him like this before, defiant, unafraid, despite the odds stacked against them. She could feel the energy between them pulse again, stronger now. And the more the human stood his ground, the more she realized that he was capable of far more than she had initially thought. The leader's eyes flicked to the human, an amused smile curling on his lips. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, do you? This energy, it's not something you can control. Not something anyone can control. It will break you, just like it's broken countless others before you. You will be our puppets, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." But even as he spoke, something shifted in the air. The energy between the human and the alien girl, once chaotic and uncontrollable, began to stabilize, almost as if it were reacting to the human's newfound strength. The alien girl felt it too, a strange surge of power that wasn't just from her, but from him as well. The connection between them was no longer just a bond, it was a force that could no longer be ignored. She looked at the human, and for the first time, she saw the full extent of what he had become in this moment. He wasn't just a helpless bystander anymore. He was a part of the energy they had awakened. He was a part of the force that had been set into motion, and now he was rising to meet it. The leader of the hunters, seeing the shift, narrowed his eyes, his confidence beginning to falter. "What's happening?" he growled, his voice suddenly tense. This wasn't supposed to happen, but it was happening, and there was no stopping it now. The alien girl could feel the balance shifting, the energy between them becoming something far more powerful than she had ever imagined. The human was not just the key. He was a catalyst, a force of nature that had been waiting for this very moment. The binding between them was not something to be controlled. It was something to be wielded. And they would wield it together. "Get ready," she whispered to the human, her voice low and steady, but filled with an undeniable fire. "It's time to take back control." In that moment, as the hunters closed in, everything changed. The energy that had once seemed like a curse, a dangerous force, was now their weapon. And with that power, they would fight back. The stakes had never been higher, and the path ahead was uncertain. But one thing was clear. The human and the alien girl were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for everything they had known, and everything they would become. The climax was near, and as the energy pulsed once more, they were ready to face whatever came next. The energy between them crackled like a live wire, humming in the air with such force that it seemed to warp the very space around them. The alien girl's heart raced, her grip tightening on the human's arm as they stood against the hunters, who were now encircling them. She could feel the pressure building within her like a storm ready to break. They were no longer just two beings caught in a dangerous game. Together, they were something far more powerful. The energy they had unwittingly awakened had become their ally, and with it, they were ready to face the hunters head-on. The leader of the hunters took a step forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied them. The smug confidence in his gaze faltered ever so slightly. The alien girl could see the shift in his posture, the way his hand hovered near a weapon that seemed far too small in comparison to the overwhelming force they were now harnessing. "You think you can control it?" the leader scoffed, though his voice lacked the same certainty it had before. You are nothing but puppets in a game you don't understand. You have no idea what you're up against." The leader smiled coldly, his eyes glinting with something almost predatory. "What we want is simple. The energy you've awakened is a power we've sought for millennia. And now that it's active, we will use it. Together, you and the human will give us control over it. You are no longer just a fugitive. You are a key to something much, much bigger. You've awakened the power, and now you will hand it over." The alien girl's mind raced. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about the very fabric of the universe itself, about the balance of power that had been maintained for so long, and the leaders of the hunters were intent on tearing it all apart. But as the tension mounted, the human's voice cut through the air. "You think you can control us?" His voice was surprisingly calm, but there was an undercurrent of something fierce in it, something that made the alien girl look at him in new light. She had never seen him like this before, defiant, unafraid, despite the odds stacked against them. She could feel the energy between them pulse again, stronger now, and the more the human stood his ground, the more she realized that he was capable of far more than she had initially thought. The leader's eyes flicked to the human, an amused smile curling on his lips. "You have no idea what you're dealing with, do you? This energy, it's not something you can control. Not something anyone can control. It will break you, just like it's broken countless others before you. You will be our puppets, and there's nothing you can do to stop it." But even as he spoke, something shifted in the air. The energy between the human and the alien girl, once chaotic and uncontrollable, began to stabilize, almost as if it were reacting to the human's newfound strength. The alien girl felt it too, a strange surge of power that wasn't just from her, but from him as well. The connection between them was no longer just a bond, it was a force that could no longer be ignored. She looked at the human, and for the first time, she saw the full extent of what he had become in this moment. He wasn't just a helpless bystander anymore. He was a part of the energy they had awakened. He was a part of the force that had been set into motion, and now he was rising to meet it. The leader of the hunters, seeing the shift, narrowed his eyes, his confidence beginning to falter. "What's happening?" he growled, his voice suddenly tense. This wasn't supposed to happen, but it was happening, and there was no stopping it now. The alien girl could feel the balance shifting, the energy between them becoming something far more powerful than she had ever imagined. The human was not just the key. He was a catalyst, a force of nature that had been waiting for this very moment. The binding between them was not something to be controlled, it was something to be wielded. And they would wield it together. "Get ready," she whispered to the human, her voice low and steady, but filled with an undeniable fire. "It's time to take back control." In that moment, as the hunters closed in, everything changed. The energy that had once seemed like a curse, a dangerous force, was now their weapon. And with that power, they would fight back. The stakes had never been higher, and the path ahead was uncertain. But one thing was clear. The human and the alien girl were no longer just fighting for survival. They were fighting for everything they had known, and everything they would become. The climax was near, and as the energy pulsed once more, they were ready to face whatever came next. The energy between them crackled like a live wire, humming in the air with such force that it seemed to warp the very space around them. The alien girl's heart raced, her grip tightening on the human's arm as they stood against the hunters, who were now encircling them. She could feel the pressure building within her like a storm ready to break. They were no longer just two beings caught in a dangerous game. Together, they were something far more powerful. The energy they had unwittingly awakened had become their ally, and with it, they were ready to face the hunters head-on. The leader of the hunters took a step forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied them. The smug confidence in his gaze faltered ever so slightly. The alien girl could see the shift in his posture, the way his hand hovered near a weapon that seemed far too small in comparison to the overwhelming force they were now harnessing. "You think you can control it?" The leader scoffed, though his voice lacked the same certainty it had before. "You are nothing but puppets in a game you don't understand. You have no idea what you're up against." The alien girl looked at the human, her heart pounding. Whatever had just happened, whatever this new force was, it was not something they had bargained for. It wasn't just the hunters they had to worry about anymore. The energy in the room shifted again, becoming almost unbearable, pressing in on them from all sides. The human's breath quickened, and the alien girl's mind raced. What had they awakened? And more importantly, what would it mean for them now? As the hunters fell into disarray, the voice boomed again, its words clear, final. "The balance has been disturbed," it intoned. "And now, the consequences will unfold. You have no idea what you've unleashed." And with that, everything went dark. The energy surged one last time, as if rejecting the hunters, the alien girl, and the human all at once. The world around them seemed to collapse in on itself, the tension unbearable. And then, just as quickly as it had all started, everything stopped. The alien girl opened her eyes, unsure of how much time had passed. The human was still beside her, but the world around them was different. The hunters were gone, the building no longer trembling with the energy they had unleashed. But the silence that followed felt hollow, like something was missing. And in that silence, one thing was clear: their battle was far from over. The energy, the force they had awakened it, was still out there, and it wasn't finished yet. The true consequences had only just begun. The silence that followed was overwhelming. For what felt like an eternity, neither the alien nor the human moved, both frozen in place, caught between the tension of what had happened and the mystery of what was about to come next. The hum of the energy, the force that had been growing between them, seemed to subside, but the atmosphere was still charged, as if the air itself was waiting for the next step. The alien girl blinked slowly, her heart racing, her breath shallow. Her mind was awash with conflicting emotions, fear, confusion, and something else. Something strange. The pull she had felt earlier had not gone away. It was still there, a magnetic force, subtle yet undeniable. The human, too, seemed to be grappling with the same feeling, his expression a mixture of awe and apprehension. "Why is it still here?" she whispered, more to herself than to him. The human shook his head, his gaze never leaving her. "I don't know, but I think we triggered something. Something big." The alien girl looked at him, her eyes searching his face. She could see the uncertainty in him, but there was something else, too, something that had been growing within him ever since their encounter. It wasn't just the connection between them that was changing. It was something deeper, something beyond words. She felt it now, more than ever before. The shift in their bond was palpable, and as much as she tried to suppress it, she couldn't deny the pull, the energy, the connection it was evolving. As the minutes passed, the quiet became unbearable. The distant rumble of the building's foundations settled into a soft vibration beneath their feet, and it was then that the alien girl felt it, an unnatural pressure, growing stronger by the second, pressing in on her mind. Her eyes widened as she recognized the sensation for what it was. Something was coming. Something or someone. She stepped back instinctively, glancing around the room as the walls seemed to close in on them. "We need to move," she said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "Now." The human looked at her, his brow furrowing in confusion. "Move? From where? What's happening?" Before she could respond, the air around them seemed to shift. It was subtle at first, a slight change in temperature, a flicker of light from the corner of her eye. But then it became undeniable. Something was moving, advancing toward them. It was not the kind of threat they could easily outrun. The alien girl's pulse quickened, the faint glow of her skin intensifying as the surge of energy grew stronger. Her hands trembled as she reached out, grabbing the human's arm and pulling him toward the door. They didn't have time for questions. They didn't have time for anything but escape. "Get to the exit," she ordered, her voice sharp and commanding. The human, now understanding the urgency in her tone, stumbled behind her, still reeling from the gravity of the situation. "What is it? What's coming for us?" he asked, his voice shaking with a mix of fear and confusion. She didn't answer, instead focusing on the pounding in her chest and the force that was pushing her forward. The walls, the ground beneath them, even the very air they breathed seemed to close in. They were being hunted, and they had no idea who or what was behind it. But there was one thing she knew for certain. If they didn't move quickly, they wouldn't survive. They reached the door. The alien girl slammed her hand against the panel, activating the release mechanism. The door slid open, revealing the narrow hallway beyond. But before they could step through, a chilling sound echoed from the darkness, a low, metallic hiss that sent a shiver down her spine. She spun around, her eyes searching the shadows. There, at the far end of the hall, two figures appeared, emerging from the dim light. Their faces were obscured by helmets, their bodies encased in dark, form-fitting armor. They were soldiers, elite soldiers, no doubt, and they were not from Earth. The alien girl's heart skipped a beat. She had seen these soldiers before, in the visions, in the stories passed down through the ages. They were the hunters, the enforcers, the ones who sought to capture what they had awakened. "Move," she shouted, grabbing the human's wrist and pulling him through the door. They ran, their footsteps echoing down the hallway as the soldiers pursued them, their boots pounding against the floor with terrifying speed. The alien girl's mind raced, her senses on high alert. She had no time to strategize, no time to think. They were being hunted, and there was no way out. Not unless she could tap into the power that had been awakened within her. The energy, the force, the bond with the human. It was their only hope. But the human, struggling to keep up, looked at her with wide, terrified eyes. "What is this? What's happening to us? What did we awaken?" "I don't know," she admitted, her voice tight with desperation. "But I know we can't let them catch us. Not now." The soldiers were getting closer. She could hear their breath, the sound of their footsteps gaining on them, and then, suddenly, the hallway began to shake. The very walls trembled, as if the building itself was reacting to the threat. The alien girl's eyes widened as she felt it, the surge of power coursing through her veins, the energy that had been dormant for so long, now coming to life. She could feel it building inside her, a force too strong to contain. She had to use it. She had to do something, anything to stop them. "Hold on to me," she shouted to the human. He looked at her in confusion, but before he could respond, the ground beneath them gave way. A powerful shockwave shot through the building. sending both of them tumbling to the ground. The walls cracked, and the air around them seemed to shimmer with raw energy. For a brief moment, everything stopped. The soldiers were gone. The shaking subsided, and the alien girl lay there, her body pulsing with energy, her mind racing to understand what had just happened. But as she slowly sat up, she saw the answer to everything. The human, looking back at her with wide, awestruck eyes, was glowing. His skin, once dull and unremarkable, now shimmered with a soft, golden light. The energy, the force, had passed between them. It was not just the alien girl who had awakened it. It was both of them. And as the realization dawned on her, she knew what had to be done. The soldiers weren't the only threat. There was something greater at stake. Something that would change everything. The final twist was coming, and it would reveal the true nature of what they had unleashed.